Saltwater fish tanks are great, but when you add coral, they become awesome. In the last video, we got the initial ecosystem of my tank set up. This was done by adding suitable rock structure, getting the tank through its nitrogen cycle, adding the cleanup crew, adding the first fish into the tank, and adding a reef-suitable light to the tank. After letting the tank sit like this for 100 days, I decided it was time to turn this tank into a true reef tank. The first thing I had to do for this was to add a couple more fish to the tank, so I headed up to my local pet store to see what they had. After looking around for a while, I decided to go with a pair of firefish gobies. These guys are very peaceful and have great personalities, and will help to bring tons of life to the upper portion of my tank. But these little guys love to find small gaps in the lid of a fish tank, so the first thing I had to do was to cut a couple pieces of plastic to go around a hole in the backsplash of the lid of my tank.
Nice little jerry-rig session.
The first couple days of them being in the tank, they were very timid, and they loved to hide whenever I got close to the tank. I gave these guys a week or two to get acclimated to the tank, and now they are out 24/7. And then it was finally time to add coral to the tank. Luckily, I had a couple of very hardy corals set aside in my mature reef tank for just this purpose. I had 3 different types of zoanthids, 2 red and green variety and then 1 orange variety. Zoanthids are a super hardy type of soft coral. They thrive in the lower parts of your tank and grow into densely packed gardens that look amazing. I also had 1 polyp of a special coral called a Palithoa grandis. This is one of my favorite corals as it has huge polyps, and whenever you drop food onto it, it rapidly closes up around it. I let these guys get comfortable in the tank for a few days, watching closely to make sure that they were all healthy. Once I knew that they were doing good in the tank, I added the second batch of coral. I went with some neon green candy cane corals. These guys are another type of very hardy coral, and they will help to add a pop of neon green to the lower corners of the tank. A couple of days later, I was shopping at my local pet store and I saw 2 absolutely beautiful designer zoas and knew I had to take them home. The red and purple one is called an utter chaos zoanthid. And the yellow, green, and orange one is called a rasta zoanthid. Right after I added these guys, I decided it was time to feed the tank with some live phytoplankton. This will give all of the coral a jump start and get them growing rapidly.
Nom, nom, nom.
After a couple of weeks of heavily feeding the fish and coral, I was only going to do a roughly 15% water change as I didn't want to disturb the ecosystem as it's still fragile at this stage. Before I started siphoning water out of the tank, I stirred the sand and rocks to knock up any food or debris that was buried. After this, I started draining the water. Once the water change was complete, I dosed the tank with Aquavitro 8.4 and fuel to give the corals the nutrients they needed to grow. A few weeks later, I decided it was time to add the third batch of coral to the tank. And it just so happened that a huge coral frag show was happening that weekend. I ended up getting 8 awesome new frags. But before I added anything, I used a PAR meter to determine the best spots for everything in the tank. This is important to do because every individual type of coral needs a specific amount of light, and taking a PAR reading will tell me what amount of light is hitting every spot in the tank. After mapping out where I was going to place everything and doing a disinfecting dip on all of the corals to remove any pests, it was time to introduce a new coral to the tanks. I went with 3 new zoanthids, a golden mushroom coral, which is a fast-growing, super hardy soft coral that loves the lower light portions of the tank and will thrive in the shadows of the mountain part of my rock structure. A hot pink brain, which is a very slow-growing large polyp stony coral, or LPS coral, that likes high light and will thrive in the upper portions of the rock structure. A chalice, which is another type of slow-growing large polyp stony coral that likes medium light levels, so it should do great in the upper portion of the tank off to the side of the light. An acan, which is another type of large polyp stony coral that likes low to medium light, so it will love the shadowy middle portion of the tank. And an acropora, which is a small polyp stony or SPS coral that needs tons of light, so it will love the highest point on the rock structure. After adding everything, I gave the tank a couple weeks to adjust to all of the new additions, and for the coral to get established in their new environment. Around this time, I noticed that my favorite coral in my 90-gallon reef tank was not doing very well. So I decided to move it into the 27-gallon to see if the better water conditions in that tank could save it. Unfortunately, it was already too late to save this coral, and I had to take it back out a couple of days later before it could do any harm to the tank. The next day, we left for a week-long vacation, and while we were gone, the tank didn't receive its usual constant attention, and it definitely showed. There was tons of algae all over the glass and sand, so right away I got to scraping the algae away. I find this process really satisfying, and it gave me a chance to do a thorough deep cleaning of the tank. While I was doing this, I noticed that I wasn't seeing one of my clownfish anywhere. And this is where I noticed that my 6-line wrasse was beginning to bully my fish, and we think it actually ended up killing one of the clowns. I'm hoping now that I noticed this, I can start to intervene, and hopefully the bullying will stop over time. Otherwise, I will have to take the 6-line out of the tank. I decided to do another water change in the tank to remove all of the algae that I scraped off, and all of the debris that I blew off the rocks and out of the sand. And once the water change was finished and the water cleared, the tank was back to looking beautiful. Now that the tank has really matured, it was finally time to add a piece of one of my favorite corals from my other reef tank. It's a blue tip green octospawn, and I love it because it grows super fast, and the polyps wave a ton under the right flow conditions. I put it in the bottom corner of the tank because it likes low light and it will bring tons of movement and color to the lower parts of the tank. It's very closed up right here, but this is it the next day all opened up. A few weeks had gone by and I decided the tank was mature enough and the corals had grown in enough so that I could finally truly call this tank a reef tank. All of the coral had grown in so well and the ecosystem was thriving. Everywhere I looked, there was tons of color and life. I cannot wait to see how this ecosystem develops as more coral, fish, and invertebrates are added to the tank. So, did you guys enjoy this type of video? Let us know in the comments below what you guys would like to see added to the 27-gallon reef ecosystem. We are a new channel, so please leave a like and consider subscribing for more content in the future.